Hi, in this video, we'll be talking about one resource on AWS known as Lambda. The key concepts that you need to know about Lambda include about 6 things that I'm talking about in this video. First, I walk you through the notes here, and then we'll go to the management console on AWS. So the key concept that you need to be aware of include number one, Lambda. Lambda is a serverless. It is a serverless compute service. What that means is it doesn't require you to worry about any underlying infrastructure. This application is hosted on a resource, on another resource, another instance, but AWS takes care of that. So that's why they have a group of systems, a group of resources or services on AWS that we refer to as serverless, meaning that even though it has a server, but it less on you, meaning that you don't have to worry about the server underneath your the service that you're using. So what you need to worry about is just your application, right? So that's why we say it's a serverless compute service. And the other thing is that it is event driven. It is an event driven service or resource, which means it requires a trigger. So there's something that you have to set up in a way it will trigger the function. And a trigger can be like any change or modification of any of your other services, which means that you can integrate Lambda to work with the other services that you have on AWS. And in this case, you can even use it for an S3 bucket. An S3 bucket, that's a bucket, like a bucket. A bucket, you store stuff, you put stuff into your bucket. In AWS, we put objects, which could be a directory, could be a file, could be an image, it could be anything that you can store. You need to store on an S3 bucket, and you can even host a static website on an S3 bucket. So, and we'll talk about that when we cover that section dedicated to S3 buckets. All right. Next, you have stateless. It is a stateless execution, and we'll look at that in a moment. It uses auto-scaling, meaning that if the number of requests coming in goes up, then AWS will take care of increasing the capacity of your underlying infrastructure that supports your Lambda functions. Remember, keep in mind that the bigger your underlying infrastructure, the more you may end up paying. Okay, keep that in mind. Supported languages, we have Python, there's Node.js, Java, Go, and then you have Ruby, and finally you have NetCore. In this course here at T2S, I'm gonna teach you about Python. You're gonna learn about Python. You'll learn about Node.js. Is Node.js and Java, they're kind of like similar, but Node.js is a runtime of the Java built on JavaScript. So I'm gonna you will learn about that and about this too here. All right, next, the execution environment, and I'll show you some of these when we go to the AWS console management console. Then you have what we call like time out and limits. So you can set those on your function. When you talk about the max limits, it's 15 minutes here, and the longer your limits and timeouts, and the more you may end up paying. So yeah, keep that in mind. This is an example. You create an S3 bucket, so every activity can trigger your Lambda function, meaning that when you configure your Lambda function, you're gonna configure to say, okay, so all of these, every time there is a put like that, uploading something into your S3 bucket, or deleting or modifying, all right, it's gonna trigger this function here to run. Let's go to the management console here. So we're gonna go to our management console. So this is where we are. And what you do, you go to the search here. See here, you type in Lambda, and then you're gonna find it here. It's gonna pop here, show up. It's gonna be the first among the services here. See, it's gonna be the first one. So click on Lambda, and when you click on Lambda, what we need to do is just to create a function. So click here, create a function. Do use author from scratch. You can give it a name like T2S function demo. So you can say something like that. And then after giving a name to your function, then you go down to the runtime. So you see here you have three parts, major parts here. So you have function name, you have runtime, and then you have the architecture. So that's the first when it comes to the basic information that you need to provide. Here we're gonna choose Python. If you click here, you see the list of the languages that Lambda functions support. And we're gonna choose Python. And the next thing is to change default execution role. You can either create a new role here, or you can choose an existing, if you have an existing role, or you can create a new role using AWS policy templates. But in our case, we'll just choose create a new role. The next thing that you need to look at is the advanced settings. When you look at the advanced settings, you see four things here: enable code signing, enable function URL, enable tags, enable VPC. To enable code signing, it's configurations that will ensure that the code has been assigned by an approved source. Okay, so here you require some signature, and to enable function URL, you're gonna create some function URLs that you assign HTTPS and points to your Lambda function. We will not do that. A tag is just you label your functions so that you can identify or find them easily and track them. You can when you use the AWS cost resource, it's gonna help you track your budget when it comes to this specific function. And you enable VPC. You connect your function to a VPC to access private resources during invocation. We will not check any of these, okay? But what we do here is just create function. So it's gonna take a little bit of time here, and I drink a little bit of water. While we wait, all right, so it's done. And when you look at the menu here, you have the code, you have a tab, test, You have monitor. I didn't mean to click there, but when you monitor everything that you so CloudWatch, it's a monitoring service, and something that we'll talk about at some point. CloudWatch will monitor everything here, so it's integrated into your Lambda function. Then you have configurations, and this is where you configure, like general configurations. You have a timeout here, and I talked about timeout. You have memory and stuff. And the triggers, this is where you create a trigger. So what do you want to use to trigger your Lambda function? All right. And when you click add here, you gotta have to define a source, and the source can be anything here, any of these that you see here. So anything that you see here can be, you can use it as a source. Meaning like a source, whatever happens in that, on that specific service will trigger this specific Lambda function here. All right. Then next you have permissions. Here you have, this is where you see all of the permissions that you may add to your Lambda functions. Destinations, you can add a destination. This is where you click to create a function URL. Environment variables, this is where you define your environments. Like here you can, for instance, you can define anything here. It could be like whatever you're using as part of your Lambda function. You can, let's say, if you were like collecting information about your users, like you can say first, like name here. And remember, this has to be defined as part of your function. Then you can add the value here if you want. And this will be like Emmanuel. And here you can, like, say if you had this as part of your, and again, part of your part of your process here, your infrastructure. So let's say you wanted to send an email, recipient email. So you can, recipient name, you can have that, phone number. You can also add this here. So that's how you do it. So you do that, okay, and then you save. All right, I will not save, I'll just cancel. Showing you, and you can create a tag here. This is where you configure this function to connect to a VPC. Here you can integrate RDS, some database. You want to connect to a relational database service, and we'll talk about that in one of the next videos. Monitoring tools here, it's already enabled, right? So that's why we have CloudWatch group here. And if you click here, you're gonna see every activity that happens on our function and on our infrastructure. You have concurrency here. You have a synchronous invocation here that you can play with. You have code signing. If you want to set this up, you can do it from here. And a lot of in a lot of companies, they don't mess up with a lot of these things, but they usually use a general configuration, triggers, and permissions. But you may come across some companies may say, okay, we want to have all the event mapped to someplace, like a destination. If you click here, you're gonna say, okay, the destination will be the SNS topic. It could be any of these things here, okay? And then you you have to create that first to add it here. Like SNS, that's simple notification service. If you wanna create a topic and then publish a number, phone number to that topic, so that every time there's a change, one of your team members will receive a text message and something like that. And we'll talk about that in another video. And you create that first, then you find the ARN, which is that's the Amazon resource number or something like that. Yeah, ARN. So you get it there. So that's kind of like a number, specific number for this specific resource. I'll cancel because I don't want to do anything like that. Okay, so you have aliases here. You can create an alias, and then you can create also publish a new version. Let's go back to the code here. So when you get back to the code here, so what we have here, it's a very simple code which will display this as a result, and the status code, meaning that if the function works okay, the code works okay, we're gonna see the 200 number here. So how do we test that? We click on the test here. So when you click on the test, it gives us this response, right? You can create, you can change the code here. Let's change the code. So we're gonna change this to allow from T2S. Allow from T2S. So we have changed that, and every time you make a change to this code, you're gonna have to deploy it first. So you deploy it, and it's deployed, and then you can test it, and then we get this message here. So this is what we change. And if you have, let's say you have a URL here, you can also test this, and that's something that we do over the course of our training. But this is what I wanted you to know. And here, if you click on the down arrow here, you can create a new test here, like configure test event. You can create a new one here, test event 1, and then you give it a title, and then you can also change. You can change the key and value, the key values here. So I will not do that, but what I want to do is just to save it at the bottom here. So I'm gonna save it, then I'm gonna test it. So this is what we get. We get the same good response. All right, so this ends our very short, I would say, brief video on kind of like a short overview of what Lambda means. And we're gonna use Lambda in our future projects. And so what I wanted to share with you is just to give you kind of like an overview concept, around Lambda. If you go to the website here, to your console, management console here, you can learn more about Lambda. If you go here, and there's a lot of there's documentation. So the beauty of AWS is documentation. Like if you click here, you go to documentation, it's gonna open a new window, and you come here, you can just Google, you can search for Lambda. You type in Lambda, and it's gonna take you to the Lambda documentation. Just click this one here, and this is where you can learn everything about Lambda. So find some time, just read this quickly. You don't have to memorize stuff. Just get familiarized with the terminologies, and then more importantly, the architecture and the key ideas behind Lambda. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it was helpful. I'll see you in the next one. God bless.